So you know people are suffering from extreme cabin fear these days, especially when you scroll through your news feed. I'm a Facebook guy. Social media kind of ended for me after Facebook, so I know that's ancient for a lot of people, but that's where I usually look. And one thing I noticed is how many people are just playing all these different status games, these different questionnaires and whatnot. And I saw a couple that, when you're stretched for content, they go back to those old playground debates. Who would win, Master Splinter or Yoda? The answer is neither one, because they wouldn't fight. They would sit down and have tea with Uncle Iroh and exchange vague wisdom. I mean, debate over. Duh. But I've seen a couple lately that go back to that most classic. If you could have any superpower, what would it be? And, the choices are always there: flying, super strength, super speed, the standard superhero fare. But the one that a lot of kids, a lot of young people kind of come back to, I gesture to myself like I'm a young person, is that question of invisibility. What would it be like to be able to come and go as you please, to do whatever you want? No one can stop you. No one can see you, and therefore you have complete autonomy. And that question has always been bandied about. It's been the subject of an entire film series, starting, of course, with the classic The Invisible Man, starring Claude Rains, the whole spawn of sequels that it did. Things like The Hollow Man, the last film I did for Drive Home Reviews proper before the world went to hell, that incarnation of the Invisible Man. And it's always some variation on, at least in most cases, some variation on a good person is driven mad by the power of it, or people do it to abuse the power. There's very few of these where the person is just kind of stuck and they're trying to figure out what to do now. The one that poses the actual question: what does it actually mean to be invisible? Something that I know a lot of people, again, when you scroll through the statuses, you see a lot of people dealing with now, because I feel invisible, and I get it. But very few of those films have ever tried to tackle that actual question. The one I can think of is, I think, the most underrated and the least talked about. And that's 1992's Memoirs of an Invisible Man, starring Chevy Chase and Daryl Hannah. I know, Chevy Chase in an Invisible Man movie. That's about what critics and audiences thought at the time, and thusly this film was kind of regulated to constant reruns on HBO, where, again, that's where I became more familiar with it. But I think this is the best Invisible Man movie ever made, in my opinion. From a technical standpoint, from a story standpoint, from a longevity standpoint. And it's a shame to me that more people haven't seen it, or haven't heard of it, or haven't seen it in a long time. But that's what I'm here to change. That's why we're here with Forgotten Gems. So let's talk about Memoirs of an Invisible Man. So first, the story. So Chevy Chase plays Nick Holloway, a guy who's just kind of coasting through life, doing as little as possible. Kind of the archetype of the late 80s, early 90s Wall Street yuppie. He's good at what he does, but he doesn't really care about what he does. He doesn't really have any lasting friendships or relationships. He spends his time at a men's club talking about dated concepts. But again, it's a place that excludes people, so he doesn't have to deal with a lot of things. So he's a guy who's pretty detached. And then through scientific circumstances, he's at a place one day. I'm not even sure why he was there. I think he was there to check on it for an investment opportunity. And scientific experiment goes haywire, And next thing you know, old Nick is invisible. However, as we soon learn, that initial thrill of being invisible takes a back seat to the actual consequences of being invisible. Everything from the small things like not being able to see your hands when you eat, not being able to remember where you left things because you can't see them, all the way up to the big one, in that a CIA agent, assassin, it's never very clear, played by Sam Neill, wants the Invisible Man for his own purposes, because what intelligence agency wouldn't want an Invisible Man on their payroll? Matter of fact, that was the concept of one of the sequels to the original Invisible Man, The Invisible Agent. So now, Nick is on the run from this CIA operative. He gets help from a young woman played by Daryl Hannah, who of course becomes the love interest, and it's this whole deal. So the first thing I want to talk about is one of the reasons I think this is one of the best takes on the Invisible Man concept is that I think it deals more realistically with what the actual reality, quote-unquote reality, of being invisible would actually mean. A lot of the previous ones, the original novel by H.G. Wells, were more interested in the social messages and all that, and thus their characters, their invisible men, are all these kind of megalomaniacs, as opposed to a real person who didn't ask for this. It's he's kind of more on par with a Spider-Man character. I suddenly became a god, now what do I do? Kind of deals. And as opposed to, as past ones have done, dealing more with the metaphorical elements, they're dealing with the practical. And they answer a lot of the practical questions that one would have about the Invisible Man franchise. For instance, I watched a documentary on the original Man series last night, and they're saying that, they think the reason those films were so popular, especially back in the day, is they were about nudity. Essentially, it was the only time nudity was allowed in Hollywood was the invisible variety. And that is always the question when you think about it, is, Ben, the Invisible Man, the only way he can do this is if he's running around stark naked. So they solve the question of that simply by having the clothes he was wearing become invisible with him, so he's not wandering around naked all the time. Which is, again, an elegant solution, but again offers that problem of now he can't remember where he left his shirt and his pants because he can't see them. He has trouble getting dressed because he can't see the clothes, he can't see where his arm is. The whole thing about not being able to eat properly, and of course we all have the fantasy of I can take whatever I want and I can do whatever I want and go wherever I want, but this film throws in the complication of what if someone's looking for you, that you can't just suddenly see food fly through the air because that's going to alert somebody. So the film really does deal, if it can said to have a deeper metaphor, with, the isolationist feeling, that feeling of being alone and not being able to communicate or interact with the world. You're in the world, but you're not connected to it. Now, in all of the subsequent Invisible Man films, that's always driven the character to a point of madness, a feeling of superiority. I'm a god. They all the original Invisible Man films had that monologue. I'm the leader of the new world and all this. Nick's character journey, is a very different one. The closest I can think of is actually a parallel to Charlton Heston's character Taylor in the original Planet of the Apes. You have a character in that film who is disgusted by humanity. He leaves the Earth to get away from humanity. He hates people and now is in a position where he has to defend humanity. Same thing here with the character of Nick. He is not some twisted mad scientist He's a guy who was very detached from the world and couldn't work up interest, and then suddenly he's cut off from it and has to relearn how to connect with the world even through this invisible state. So it's a neat take on the material. Invisible Man films have always been the haven for the special effects community. It was one of the things that they hung the original Invisible Man film on, and all subsequent Invisible Man films, with maybe the exception of the last couple, because, as I've said, while I love a good special effect and I love what it can do for your storytelling, it does kind of take the fun out of the question of, oh, how'd they do that? Well, they did it on a computer. This film, going, early 90s, it did do a little bit of it on the computer, but this film is a haven for innovative special effects of the time. It is like an encyclopedia. I remember seeing a bunch of specials on it on HBO when I was a kid, where they talk about how they did it. And they did everything from, they did some computers. Computers were just kind of coming into their own at that point. They did some classic blue screening or green screening. They did puppetry. They used every trick in the book to make this Invisible Man practical and work. And it still holds up. I think 90% of the effects are still really good. A couple that jump out in my mind. They love doing the thing where you see Chevy Chase on screen and he's talking, he's like carrying a phone or something, and then you see the same thing reflected in the mirror and the phone's kind of hanging in midair. So they do the mirror trick a bunch, which for Invisible Man films is kind of the same as, look, no strings kind of bit. They do a bit at the very beginning where he's proving he's invisible by chewing gum and blowing a bubble, which is really impressive. They do a really beautiful scene where he and Daryl Hannah get caught in the rain, and of course the rain is like hitting him and showing the outline. It's a really beautiful effect. They do one, again, using every trick in the book, including some animation, where he's smoking, and so smoking a cigarette is not the impressive part. You see the smoke go into his lung, fill his lungs up, then come back out. But as the smoke comes out, you see for like just a few seconds the outline of his face. It's a very quick thing, but it's really well detailed. So the special effects in this are outstanding, and they hold up really well. And again, I love that they use just every available trick. So that then brings us to the cast. You can have all the great special effects in the world. If you don't have a good story, which this one does, or good actors to pull it off, those special effects are meaningless. Avatar being a prime example. Chevy Chase is not the first actor you would think of for a meditative look at invisibility. He was known as a comic actor. And I got to admit, while he's not, I don't think he's given an Oscar-worthy performance here. This is, I think, the best performance he's ever given. This is the most grounded, the most realistic, the most human character he's ever played. Which shouldn't come as a surprise, because part of his charm in things like the National Lampoon movies is that he was supposed to be your average Joe. So he always had that kind of everyman appeal, just with the stupider aspects dialed up a bit. Here he dials those back and is able to give a very good and believable performance. And in fact, some of his comic training pays off for this film. He was always a very physical comedian, always, falling down stairs and things like that. So in scenes like where he's trying to eat for the first time and can't see his hands, or when he's trying to put on his invisible shirt, Chevy Chase's skill as a physical comedian is quite helpful. And it always kind of walks the line of going a little too comical, which isn't a bad thing, but there's some pretty intense scenes in here where you don't want to stop and laugh. You want to be on the edge of your seat. So it tiptoes up to that line a little bit. But again, they're using the actor that they have, and I think he gives a pretty good performance. Sam Neill, most famous, of course, for Jurassic Park, which wouldn't be for a couple years after this, is the villain. You're Heavy. I'm never quite sure, even now watching it, if he's supposed to be a CIA agent, an assassin. He works for the CIA. We know that. And he is he's the Doc Hopper of the film. He is after the Invisible Man, and he will do anything he has to do to get it. And they start him out with maybe some believable motivation, what we could do. You could imagine what would happen again, thinking of the Invisible Agent, if we'd had someone like you back in 39. You could have changed history for the better. So it starts out with okay, you can see where he's coming from, but this guy's a little off, and then slowly descends into complete psycho. Sam Neill, just by his presence and that voice and his accent, has always been a good one for playing villains. Even when he's playing a good guy, it's hard for him to escape that villain shadow. One of the things that always stick out to me in Jurassic Park is when he calls Richard Attenborough, to tell him the phones are working, and Richard Attenborough goes, "The children." He's like, "The children are fine." And you keep expecting him to add this, "and if you want to see them alive again, he's doing a ransom call. But he has an excellent presence, and if you need someone as a believable threat in an unbelievable film, this guy really plays off, which is another thing I like about this movie, sidestepping from the characters and the actors for a second, is it's not a horror movie, it's not a scary movie, it's a lot of different things. It's a little comedy, it's a little romance, it's an adventure. I love, chase adventure films where someone's on the run. I love those. And it's one of those. It's a lot of things in that weird way that only the late 80s and early 90s could really get right, of something that doesn't have a definable genre, seems to have elements of all of them, and yet they all seem to flow together in a natural way. Daryl Hannah as Chevy Chase's love interest, and I wish I could say more about the character, but that's really what she is. She's not so much a character, she's a plot device. She's the girlfriend, the love interest, the damsel in distress. A lot of tropes rolled into one, which are necessary to keep the story moving, but it doesn't give her a lot to play. What I'm going to say, and why I think Daryl Hannah was great for this role, is for this role, you need a Belle. You need a Beauty and the Beast Belle, someone that you could believe could fall in love with someone out of the ordinary, and not just in the regular way someone is out of the ordinary, with an invisible man. And she always had that kind of doe-eyed, girl next door presence, but also the intelligence to go with it. So there's not a lot for her to play here, but she's a warm presence, which is what you need in a film like this, and you understand why this is the person that Chevy Chase's Nick will gravitate towards, because he feels like he can trust her, that she's warm and inviting. And Daryl Hannah has always been very good at portraying that. So an excellent cast that works very well together in a really tight, entertaining screenplay, brilliantly directed by John Carpenter of Halloween fame, believe it or not, with special effects that still hold up. Is this movie perfect? No, it's not. But its imperfections are more crimes of the time. There's a scene in this, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, So Daryl Hannah is at a beach house with her friends, Michael McKean's wife, and this snotty British guy who just screams douchebag. And I've seen him in other movies, but I can't remember what his name is, and I can't even remember the movie that's all in, but I know I don't. And the guy is just, creeping on Daryl Hannah. And then he follows her to her bedroom and he fucking attacks her. And the whole thing is there so Chevy Chase, who is in the room, and we can see Chevy Chase through the movie, we the audience. There are a lot of scenes where he's not visible, but and for a lot of it you can actually see him walking around interacting. But anyway, the guy is on top of Daryl Hannah and she's saying, no, get off. And Chevy Chase grabs him and pulls him off. And the guy, of course, thinks little Daryl Hannah is that strong and threw him off. Yeah, that's great. That's funny, except for the fact that guy fucking tried to rape her. And she handles it with kind of closing the door and rolling her eyes. And it's never brought up. She doesn't go to Michael McKean, hey, your buddy there tried to rape me last night. Or no, they just kind of go about it. And it's cringeworthy that's how we handled things like that back then. It really is. It's disgusting. And it's a scene that really, it is of its time, but not in a good way. It's very hard. I fast forward past that scene because you can't ignore it. It's like the guy tried to fucking rape her. And we just kind of let that go. Oh, hoity ho, comic beats. There's a scene also in where Chevy Chase is trying to fool Sam Neill and all them, so he sets someone up to dress in the Invisible Man garb, i.e. the ace bandages and all that, while he disguises himself as a cab driver. Yeah, a cab driver in brown face, wearing like I guess it's supposed to be like an Indian kind of thing, the Indian cab drivers, and it's kind of icky. You're like, oh, he's in brown face. Oh, that's not good. Those are the two big things for me. Those are the two big of the time things that are just like, oh, bad, really bad, no excuse bad. Couple other minor hiccups. I talked about Chevy Chase and his skill as a comedian coming in handy, but at some points it's also a little bit of a hindrance, and again takes serious scenes and makes them feel lighter. They talk about the fact that he's walking, people can't see him, a guy reaches out to call for a taxi and he runs into it, because he didn't see Chevy Chase coming. And when Chevy Chase does that, it's a very kind of comical, blah, blah, fall down, which if you were doing a comedy, it would work. But in this instance, it's a little too much. And that happens a few times. There's a few little, the physicality gets a little too crazy. Just a smidge. It's nothing that ruins the film. It's just a tiny little bit, or the wrong bit of comedy at the wrong time when you're trying to be serious. They want you to be very invested in this guy, so those little comic beats need to be very cleverly placed, and some places they're just not. But those are minor quibbles. The film as a whole is outstanding. A lot of fun, exciting, romantic. It's just an all-around good movie. And it's always kind of, and I think what kind of got it is maybe the Chevy Chase connection, that age-old problem of, well, this isn't a comedy kind of thing. But I would say that it is well worth the time, and it's well worth the energy to go check this one out. Especially if you are a fan of classic special effects techniques and you want to have a little bit more fun playing the how did they do that game. I thought of one other one real quick before I go. So they do the bit where they put makeup on him so Daryl Hannah can see him again, which is something they did in some of the original Invisible Man films. They used coal cream, and they did the whole effect of him smearing it on, and you slowly start to see his face. But this time, what they do is really cool, is when they're putting it on, they also shoot the scene from the back, so you're seeing the reverse. You're seeing his face like if you were looking through his skull, basically. So I have no idea how they did that, but it's a really good effect. So there's a lot of them in there, and again, just a genuinely exciting adventure film. I really enjoy it, and I hope that you'll check it out yourself. So, you enjoy Invisible Man films? You enjoy the premise as Hollywood sure seems to? Well, here's one that you probably missed. Take some time and see if you can find it. All right, so another forgotten gem exposed to the world. You're welcome. I'm just doing God's work. Of course, there's many more to come. So stay happy, stay healthy, keep calm, carry on, and as always, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.